Welcome to the Season 2 premiere of Artroverted. This week, we speak with Bonnie Pitman, former director of the Dallas Museum of Art and current Distinguished Scholar in Residence at the UT Dallas Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History at the University of Texas at Dallas, and the director of Art Brain Innovations at the UT Center for Brain Health. In our conversation, we discuss her transition from museum director to trailblazer in the field of art and medicine. After contracting a rare pulmonary virus abroad, she was forced to abandon her museum career. After spending long hours in hospitals and clinics around the country, she realized that physicians could benefit from her experience as an art educator. She launched a program that went international, bringing medical students into the museum to teach them how to look at art, a practice that's changed how they engage with their patients and the field of medicine. Her second career with art and health has made an indelible impact on the field and shows the power of art to transform our lives. So without further ado, let's jump in. So you've had a quite distinguished career in museums and decades of experience working at the intersection of art and medicine and art and healing. And I'm so excited to get into that. But before we do, I want to just talk about how you got into the arts.
Well, it's a very interesting question because I grew up in a small community in Massachusetts. It's called Provincetown. It's at the very end of Cape Cod. And when I was there as a child, which was in the 50s, it was a town that attracted a lot of artists, Hans Hofmann and many writers. And I just thought there were two jobs in the world. I thought either you were a fisherman and carpenter, which the Portuguese communities did, or you were obviously an artist. I didn't understand that there were other jobs that you could have. And so I hung out with artists and used to visit Hans Hofmann's studio, and Robert Motherwell lived across the street from us. And so the great family, the Walker family that established the Walker Art Museum, everybody was there, and it was a very relaxed summer community. And then, of course, they all went away in September. And those of us who lived there, my mother had divorced and moved to Cape Cod, continued on in our lives. And so it wasn't until I was like 10 or 11 years old that I realized that, that there were very different jobs that you could have in the community. So I just grew up around artists. So that was, I think, one of the most influential aspects of my life. And then my mother and my grandmother loved going to art museums. And so when I visited my grandmother, which was as frequently as possible because she loved art, my brothers didn't come with me, which was a great bonus when you're the only girl in the family and you're expected to do all the girl chores such as the laundry and dishes and things like that. I hung out with my grandmother as much as possible. And so that escape was also very important. So she took me to museums all over New York City, Boston, and of course, Washington, D.C. And there I just fell in love with art and loved going to see the objects, the paintings and the sculptures, and made up stories. I hadn't studied anything, but I made up stories and lived in a fantasy world that was based on these wonderful experiences. So it was those early years. It led to me studying art history in college and then and traveling in Europe. And the more I got involved in the art world, the more I decided that this was a place that I'd like to work in.
What was it like growing up in Motherwell and Hofmann Studios and others?
Well, one, I didn't realize it was supposed to be a special thing. Mm-hmm. But two, the thing I remember most was Robert Motherwell was incredibly tall, and he was always working in his studio in Provincetown in the summertime. And Hans Hofmann had huge hands, just enormous hands. And his studio was very messy, rather compared to Robert Motherwell's. And so both of those lived very close to my parents in distance from our home. And it was just something that I took for granted and just remember these. I didn't know these were important artists. And of course, at that time in the early 50s, they weren't considered to be the great artists that they are today. So it was a very normal experience. And I would just sit there and watch them paint. And for many years, I thought I was going to be a painter and was accepted to Rhode Island School of Design 3 times.
Wow.
And my parents absolutely would not let me go because they knew that I would never make money. Even back then.
Right.
Artist life was one of poverty.
Are there any of those paintings that you have a particular affinity for that maybe you see in museums and you think, oh, that just takes you back to your childhood, or?
Right. Well, in my house, I was fortunate enough when I was older to buy a number of Motherwell prints. I could never afford a painting because they're way too expensive. So I have another number of Motherwell prints in my home. And and then with Hofmann, I worked for 5 years at the Berkeley Art Museum in Berkeley, California, and Hofmann left his collection of paintings to the Berkeley Art Museum. So I had lots of opportunities to not only see them, but also to work with the curators. I was the deputy director at the museum, and I was able to mount exhibitions and work with the collections of his work. And they're incredible pieces. I mean, they just, those blocks of powerful pink, reds and blues and yellows and pinks, just come out and, hit you in the chest and stomach. I mean, there's a physicality to Hofmann's paintings that is so, and sense of color that is so, for me, so energizing. And Motherwell's paintings were like Sumi, his beautiful brushstrokes of Sumi, paintings of the Japanese and his black and whites, and also his color paintings when he does them are very planal. So you don't get the kind of push and pull that you do in Hofmann. But I remember all that from just sort of hanging out with them.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, the works are really arresting.
Yeah, it was a fun chapter. There's no question.
So did that lead you to specialize in post-war art? Was that something that you wanted?
Definitely, they had a big influence on me. And when I was studying art history at Sweetbriar College and then later at Tulane in New Orleans, both of those were very influential. The experiences I had in New Orleans, I was really captivated by the African collection, which I helped to unpack that in that museum. And in New Orleans, we unpacked some great collections that had been given to the museum. Also in Seattle, when I worked in Seattle Art Museum, we unpacked the Catherine Wright collection of African art. So I became very familiar with that and with Asian art. Once I was teaching in museums as a museum educator, you have to learn the collections that you're teaching in depth. And they were at that time small enough museums that when something came like a big new collection, it was all hands on deck. And I would actually I was trained by the curators and registrars to unpack things. And it was a great opportunity. So the interest in art history expanded much beyond 20th century American and European art into other ethnic areas. So it's the gift of studying museum collections, which you know.
And I love African art. I took an African art class in college. I was between, it's kind of a shame to say, I sat in a Japanese art class, and immediately between the teacher and the material that they were teaching, I thought, I'm never going to get these names. And later, having worked a lot with Asian art, I felt really bad about that. But African art, I was just transfixed with, because it's a really kind of a mix of visual culture and anthropology, right. And it doesn't really have anything to do with art per se, other than its kind of relation to, or its influence on European artists of the early 20th century. And now with restitution, that's kind of a new frontier is really happening. I mean, France just agreed, I think, with Benin to give works of art back. And there's a long history of that, and that restitution's finally coming in the field of African art. But as far as the presentation of African art, I've been to many African art collections, and I think one of my favorite is the Musée Jacques Chirac, the Quai Branly in Paris, just because of how moody it is. However, I really firmly believe, and it's not because I'm talking with you right now, that the Dallas Museum of Art has the best presentation of African art that I've ever seen. And it's because it provides that context. And I'd wonder if you could talk kind of about that, about the evolution of presenting African art in context.
Well, I think that has developed rapidly over the years in terms of a deeper understanding of what the African cultures are and the meaning of these works within those cultures and over time. What has happened is that initially it was an anthropological museums primarily held the collections, and it wasn't until both in Europe and the United States that showing African art in the context of an art museum where specific works were pulled out because of their aesthetic merit as opposed to the meaning of the context of the work and the artists who had created them, that people began to look at African art in different ways. And it's a very convoluted history, especially, I think, in the United States because of the situation with slavery and the battles for that are inherent and that we've seen certainly during these past months and years over the years, that it wasn't valued the same way. And there was a tremendous difference in the perception of African art and the perception of art, perception of African art and indigenous art, I should say. So Native American, Aboriginal, lots of different cultures that have exquisite works of art were not as valued. That has changed largely because curators came into the collections and largely because donors started collecting this work. And the result of the donors' interest and their support of these collections transformed museums, because when they passed the collections on to the museum had to reconsider the story of their institution and place these works into new context. Margaret McDermott here in Dallas was the primary funder of works of art in the African collection. She and her husband, Eugene McDermott, purchased two large collections for the DMA, and they became the foundation of the DMA's African art collection that you see in the galleries today. And she brought that work in specifically to help speak to the different aspects of the community. And it was her intent, the family's intention, to provide opportunities for African Americans and Africans who lived here in Dallas to see these cultures and to understand their heritage. And I think over the years, the DMA has always treasured the works. We've had great curators, especially now Rosalind Walker, who is the senior curator of African art.
Fantastic individual.
Yeah, and she's led the scholarship and advancement, and I hired her when I was at the DMA, and she had been the former director at the National Museum of African Art. So we've always been lucky to have this kind of leadership, and Roz transformed the installation of the works of art at Dallas, and she also has been a major part of the community and has helped many, many other people to engage and learn from these incredible pieces.
Yeah, that has been my experience. And Dallas actually has a very large population of Native Africans from all over Africa, maybe the largest population anywhere in the U.S. But I just love that you walk into the gallery and there's two entrances to the gallery, and you're hit first with this sign that says African art in context, and it has about 3 bullets. And it says that the concept of art did not exist in African societies as it does in Western societies. Most of these objects were designed for a specific social or religious function, and what you're seeing, and they were used, and what you're seeing now is a snapshot in the life of these objects. And I can't remember the third bullet, but those alone are just enough to kind of allow you to take a pause and reflect on what you're about to see. And that's something that's really inherent in your practice and how you approach and teach art. And maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. One of the works that I've there's so many in that collection, but the great Nkisi Nkondi, which is sort of in the center of the gallery, it's a large sculpture of a man whose hands are on his hip and his chest is billowed out, and he has nails that are hammered into his chest and a large protruding belly button, which is with a cowrie shell on it, and that's referred to as a paquette. And the wonderful thing about the objects in the collection and the way that I teach is that most people look at that and like, what is it? And why would I want to spend time with that particular piece? And he looks kind of fearsome and difficult. And then others come along and don't even look at it, not realizing it's one of the great treasures of the collection. In my practice of teaching, one of the things that happens is that I teach a lot of medical students and physicians. And what one of the underlying stories of the Nkisi Nkondi is that it is a healer and a medicine. It brings healing and medicine into the community, and it does a fantastic job of with this fierce attitude and the bold structure of the figure to rethink your assumptions about what it means. And in many ways, he's like a doctor, trying to heal the division in the community or actually heal people that are sick. And that's what I try to do, is unveil the stories so that people can see that just like beauty changes in different perspectives and in different cultures and times, periods and times, so does our understanding of a work of art. So the opportunity that I have of really beginning to explore those stories with people from and I often get people to stand in the posture of the Nkisi Nkondi. And what they don't realize, they're lifting their heads up and opening their eyes fully wide, stretching them, and their mouth is partially pursed and air is coming out. And this powerful figure is standing there. But then if you really look at the bottom, you notice that his short legs are bent and his heels are up. So when you get into this powerful position, you realize I'm not really balanced, and this would be a hard position to sustain for an extended period of time. And that's exactly the point, because the energy running through your body is as you're standing in this form, is exactly what the artist wanted to convey.
I want to go back because teaching about art and healing through objects was not always part of your job, and now it's really become your one of your primary missions. Maybe you can tell me how you segued from your career as a museum director into that.
That's a great question. It was a very unexpected turn in events in my life. I was the director of the Dallas Museum of Art. It was the job of my lifetime. I was the happiest I'd ever been and was thrilled to have this appointment following my dear friend Jack Lane. And it was things were going very well for me. We were getting ready to present the King Tut show with all of its excitement and trauma. And then I went to the art fairs in the spring, February, to 2008. I went to both Brussels, and then I went on to work on a number of other projects. And what happened was that I contracted a virus in my lungs, which I still have today. Now 12 years later, and that virus led to me having to retire from the museum. But while I was at the museum, I used to spend a lot of time, unfortunately, in clinics and had to go down to Baylor, UT Southwestern, and now my doctors are at Baylor, so I go over there. And I had all this time when I was sitting in chairs getting treated in the different clinics for breathing issues. And that's where I started reading about art and medicine and thinking about new ways to interpret the collection, and was getting very excited about this. And it's interesting because at the time that I retired from the museum for my health reasons, it was important for me to acknowledge that I was beginning to open up this whole new field. And thanks to friends at the UT Southwestern, Dan Podolsky and a few others, they, along with one of the physicians, invited me to come and develop a course that would teach early medical students, first and second year, how to develop their observation skills to look at art. And I found that there were lots of organizations around the country that were doing this, and it just led down a path of research and exploration. And I developed my course and started teaching it. And so that connection between basically rethinking how I looked at works of art, it came from there. You take the great Gothic bed on the American floor and the fourth level of the DMA, and you walk by that bed, which is magnificent, made out of mahogany. I mean, it just stands, almost 16 feet tall, and it's, such an incredible story behind it. People don't always think about the meaning of a bed. For example, all the babies that were born, all the people that died, all the cycle of life, which we were talking about also in African art, that these inanimate objects have a story behind them that is just as powerful as the way that the object was made, and it's just how we look at it from an aesthetic point of view. And that those new stories became part of the research that I was doing on the collection. And even after I left, the trustees, I was writing the handbook on the collection. And the more I was doing the research on that, although it was certainly not appropriate to bring it into the handbook, it began to open my eyes and understanding as to how these works of art had multiple layers of stories. And as art historians, we always tended to gravitate to the top level, which was who is the artist, how was the object made, how was it used, and didn't get into the real meaning of these works of art. That a portrait of a woman might be a portrait of a son painting a portrait of his mother who died of cancer, and those, that whole story, the stories of resilience and healing, are in works of art that can be amplified by teaching. The other part of the teaching that I did was the stories were certainly there, but was really about the observation of works of art. And I've developed a framework that I now use called the power of observation, which codifies for people who are not in the arts a way in which they can learn how to scan a work very quickly, how they can attend to it, beginning to look more closely at particular details and understand the work, and then connecting the work to their lives and to the world around them. And that's where you often bring in these stories of information and enrich your understanding of the work. And then the last stage is transformation, where you need to develop personal connection to the work of art. And in the transformation phase, when you're with me in the galleries, that's a lot of what we work on. For example, I talked about standing in the posture of the Nkisi and Kandi. Well, suddenly you become the work of, you reconsider using your whole physical self, all of your senses, to consider what the meaning of this work is. So the power of art has become a framework that I use now to teach both medical students at UT Southwestern. I've taught all over the country, to seminars and workshops, to other universities and museums. And I also teach it out at UT Dallas, where I'm currently on the faculty, to honors students. And they, it's a life-changing experience because you begin to understand how to see the world around you.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people struggle with context when they look at art, when they go in museums. They feel intimidated by the works, whether it's contemporary art that's based on theory that they don't understand or they haven't read,
right,
or whether it's more historical works of art or even decorative art, something that they think doesn't apply to them because they can't see how it relates to the time that they're living in now. But why doctors? Why med students?
Well, why not? Let me just say this. The most important, having been a patient now, and I'm in clinics all the time, I became very aware that many doctors, not all of them, but many doctors, are there to solve a problem. So they read the chart and it says you have, in my case, a lung condition. So they come in and analyze you for that lung condition without thinking about the whole of you. And so often, because my condition is so rare, I go to different clinics. I've been all over the country, and desire to focus on you intently and to solve the problem does not open their experience to thinking about a person as a holistically and what all the other challenges might be that they're facing. So one was, as I say to my medical students, is to get you to stop reading your iPad and looking at the chart and start talking and communicating to the patient. And that engagement with the patient, then you have to know how to look at the patient. And when they do the training around such things as, how do you interview your patients and how do you do an assessment, many of us know that there's a series of questions that they run down, and one hopes that they begin to make new connections between ideas and others. So the training is really to help them develop a set of skills that amplify their visual literacy so that they're both looking at the illness of the patient, but also as a whole. And another example is many times they, when you enter a room and a patient's been there for a few days or a week or something, do you look around the room? Are there any people visiting? Are there books or pictures of family members? Do they have a life outside the hospital context? I mean, what can you learn just by looking at that human being who's sitting there and suffering, to pick up and have a conversation with that individual, which may lead to a discovery of something that isn't written on the chart. A third example, one of my favorites, is in the teaching that I do. I teach a class on color, and I go over Albers' color theory and show how images change by the use of the colors, obviously, but and contrasting colors. And then we have an exercise where a dermatologist shows different diseases in the hands and how with different colors of skin that same disease looks differently. And then I have the students try to identify, there are usually 30 plus students, one color of red out of 60 Pantone colors of red, and there are hundreds more than that, but I give them 60, which is the true red. And so it takes several rounds of arguing and fighting for them to agree on what is quote unquote red. But the whole point is that different eyes, as we know, different eyes see differently. And some people see more yellow, some people see more blue. There are people who can see 10 million shades of colors. And so the average is about 7 million. So that notion that you're really, it's not just red. I have to describe the shade of red. I have to describe the context within the skin and the pigment so that the next physician picking this up will be able to really understand what my notes are. If I just write down red lesion, I'm not giving them enough information. So those were some of the reasons, humanistic reasons, and then the rationale of diagnosing a patient and trying to have hard evidence that they realized that their descriptions were complete enough for another person to understand the work. I'm very lucky. I have a superb physician as my lead doctor, and I watch how Dr. Rosenblatt does all of this, and it's really taught me how to incorporate some of these ideas into the work that I do in teaching.
Wow, that's really incredible. All from a little exercise at looking at color swatches that you can really develop that sense of description and analysis.
Right, and that they understand. That's as one student said, I will never write down that it's a red lesion again in my life. I understand now that is not complete information. And so there are enough of those exercises that they really can, it's really exciting to see how they can change things.
Wow, that's great. And I could see that kind of leading to a trickle-down effect all the way down to the medical transcribers, who are transcribing their notes. People, just kind of the far-reaching effect that this practice is having. Yeah. You lecture widely, and every time I go to one of your lectures, I learn so many new things. One of the last lectures that I heard you speak in person, you threw out a little factoid that there are 1,440 minutes in a day.
Right.
And what you can do with them. And you spend some of those minutes on a regular practice that you invented. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that.
Thank you for asking that question. And yes, the 1,440 minutes in a day is a very important reminder in my life that what a gift it is to be here. It came out of, I had been sick for 3 years and was really not doing well. And I retired from the museum that in the summer of 2012. And it was not in a very happy place because I was really sick, combined with I wasn't sure what I was going to do next in my life. And one of the interesting things that happened is that I had a biopsy that summer, and the biopsy results were very conclusive that the microorganisms that are in my lung are going to continue to grow and that there's nothing we can do. And the day I received that news was a pretty tough day because pretty much all these things that I loved in my life had disappeared. And so it was like, okay, what am I going to do now with my life? And I went home that afternoon and my brother, I had picked up my brother at the airport and told him about this. And he said, well, why don't you just take a rest and we'll talk about this when you're up. And that's the great thing about siblings, is they know when to comfort you and to love you. And that afternoon, I went to sleep and literally woke up abruptly and wrote down what has become a very, very powerful part of my life, which is doing something new. So I woke up and I wrote down, I'm going to do something new every day. I'm going to take an ordinary day and make it extraordinary through the power of intention. I'm going to go to new places. I'm going to meet new people. I'm going to do new things with old friends. I'm going to explore big and little things in my life, because some days I simply can't do anything more than try a new cup of tea. I'm not in a position where my body is strong enough to do more than that. And other days, I can go out for long walks or go to before COVID, take a plane trip and see new museums or see something new. And then it said I have to do it within 24 hours and I cannot carry forward. So I can't do something yesterday and then count it today. So the 24 hours are set. And the last thing I wrote down, which was the best, is I can have new flavors of ice cream. So that was kind of, I love ice cream. And so that was my fail-safe. And I can guarantee you, if you come over to my house, the ice cream, I have more ice creams than I have food in my freezer. And the trouble is they only count once. So when you buy a pint of ice cream, it lasts too long. And so I have ice cream parties periodically when I would invite everybody over to enjoy that. But this simple practice of taking each day and making it extraordinary through the power of intention has been something that I have loved, and it has helped me with my staying connected to people, my creativity, my capacity to see the compassion, which is very important in life, to myself and to others. It has also really helped my resilience, because when you suffer with long-term illnesses, you get worn out, quite frankly, and your body gives out from time to time. And my something new practice just sort of keeps me, you got to get up, you got to do something new today, whatever it is. I would say the best part is that my friends have become big components of this, and I can call somebody and say, gosh, I need to do something new today, and you need to come over and help me. And so people who know me love it, because it takes them into a new, into a new place. And so I have lots of wonderful stories and experiences with friends who have played a big part in it, really played a big part. So yesterday, I think it was 3,450 days that I have been doing my practice, 3 to 5 new things every single day. And I keep a record of them in my little iPhone under notes. I take photographs mercilessly, so people, and I never know when I take a photograph whether I'm actually going to use it. But it's an important thing for me to keep those records, because I think that by recording it, it's sort of, it's a way in which I end the day in my life. So the posts are always really late at night. And it's a reminder that for the next morning, when I go to bed, not to think about work or my illness, but to rather think about what I'm going to do that's something new the next day. So this practice has really driven my life in so many ways. It's led me to, I think, explore art and medicine in very powerful ways, and it has kept me going. At a time when it's kind of hard sometimes.
And in true Bonnie fashion, it's not something that you've kept to yourself, but something that you've made an effort to share with many, many people. And one of those groups is your partnership with the University of Texas Center for Brain Health. And I'd love if you could talk about that partnership and what you're doing there, and how you're expanding the Do Something New practice to a scientific practice.
Oh, that's a wonderful question, and I'm very happy to share with you. Sandy Chapman, who is the founding director of the Center for Brain Health, which is one part of UT Dallas, gave me the opportunity. We've been friends, and I was telling her about my Do Something New practice, and she said, Bonnie, you have to tell this story. So long time ago, I gave my first talk ever at the Center for Brain Health on my Do Something New practice to her scientists and to some friends who she let me invite. What was exciting was that over the years, we have developed a deeper and deeper understanding what the potential for doing something new is, that it does all these things that brain health is about, learning new skills. Last night, for example, I took a cooking class and learned how to make this amazing gingerbread with Darren McCready, who is the former chef of Princess Diana and the Queen in England.
Ooh,
and
la, la.
So talk about delicious. It was amazing. But, I might not have done that. I just wanted to really stretch out and try something new. And he was a great, commentator. And we also learned how to make fudge, which I can't make on my own. I would eat the whole thing. But the gingerbread I made was fantastic. So it gets you into a place that you're trying new things. At any rate, what the Center for Brain Health has a wonderful new project that they're undertaking. And that project is really to do a study, a 20-year study of brain healthy activities that will try to improve the quality of their brain health by 20% over the times of the study. And people can enroll in the study and just go to the Center for Brain Health, and you can sign up and look for the Brain Health Project, and you can just enroll right there. What we do is we'll be sending you, you do a study of yourself so that you understand how where you are now. You have a place to gauge yourself that looks at your life holistically, wellness activities, your dealing with compassion, dealing with exercise, all these different attributes in your life. And so you have a score now, and then through exercises and projects, and this is where this do something new, and we're going to do work with the power of observation, are going to be available for the people in the study to take these like mini modules and study them, and then learn how to do something new, and then you months later, I think it's twice a year, you retake your baseline study so you can see where you're moving. In the first round of participants, which was just started, and it started during COVID, so that's a really tough time. At any rate, what happened is they found that there was a 5 to 7% increase in people's brain health, the quality of their brain health, just in the first 6 months. So the idea is that I'm going to partner with them to develop these programs and units and try to provide opportunities to spread the word about my Do Something New practice, but also and power of observation, but also get some clinical data that we can use to help understand the impact of these projects.
Yeah, I love it. I've been to many events there and participated in one of their studies, and what they're doing is incredible. And it's crazy that how little we know about the brain. You know, it's our most important resource. But I love that you're working to make sure that art and the brain are connected, because they are, and that we have proof on that. So yeah, it's wonderful. I love it, and I can't wait to participate in it. But as far as doing something new that's happened for me a lot in the pandemic has been visiting museums virtually and seeing art virtually. Mm-hmm. And it's, this week, actually, they started to administer the COVID-19 vaccine throughout the U.S., but in Texas, it started yesterday. And as that happens, we're kind of starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And for having been starved of art for so long, it's been really difficult. And being able to see it virtually has been exciting. But at the same time, for museums having been closed for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, we're really worried that they're not going to survive. And the American Alliance of Museums published a study in July that said that 1/3 of U.S. museums will close forever, and that's a devastating figure. And in response to that, people like the American Alliance of Museum Directors in April relaxed the rules around museum deaccessioning guidelines to allow them to use some funds for general operating expenses so that they could stay afloat. But during these closures, museums and the art world has really gone online and really started to figure out how to become more creative. And I'm wondering, what sort of digital initiatives have you seen that museums or other art institutions have developed that have been of particular, interest to you, and something that you think is going to help them continue to engage audiences in the future and make a difference? Well,
it's, as you said, it's definitely changed the way people experience museums. And I think that there are so many great examples of institutions who have moved in this direction that it's been exciting to see them. I think locally, we've got great examples both in the Nasher and in the DMA, where you can have virtual tours of exhibitions that are up and you can't get to, or you can participate in classes or programs online in an abundance that they have never seen. All of them have seen a growth in their audiences, the online audiences, and I think this is going to change the way that I think in museums are, as they move through this, are excited that they're seeing their online attendance grow. And the challenge will be in the future to figure out how to keep a balance between online and in-person programs as they move forward. Nationally, I think that I think the Metropolitan has done an extraordinary job with their online programming, largely because they have approached it in different ways. Last week I watched a concert in the galleries where a musician was playing the Stradivarius violin in the music galleries, and there was, you listen to this incredible instrument as they were playing Bach in the galleries, which were, just the sound and the experience was so extraordinary. I know we don't all have Stradivarius violins in our collection, certainly not here in Dallas. Mm-hmm. So that was, but they set up these very specific programs like that bring together different media, different art forms to explore the Metropolitan. And I love their curator talks when the curators go into the galleries and you can get these kind of mini viewpoints of what's going on in the collections. So the Met and Metropolitan Museum in New York and the Museum of Modern Art have really done some outstanding work. I think what's also surprising is that some of the other museums, for example, the Norton Museum in Florida, which I hadn't really, I know about, but I hadn't really been on my horizon line, is another example of a good museum, a very good collection that is doing online digital experiences, and they do a lot of artist interviews, as they do in Colorado at the Heidi Zuckerman does up in her institution in Colorado. So there's a huge range of programming that's going on that captivates you. Also, the ones that are behind the scenes that show you how works are cared for, conservation goes on. Those are things that you don't normally get to see if you're a regular visitor to a museum. So now those behind-the-scenes stories are coming out and becoming much more accessible so that people can understand the role of museums in the future in a way that they hadn't before. So I think it's a platform that's growing and will continue long after the the virus is over with. And I think that the challenge for museums is trying to figure out this new balance between in-person and digital programming so that both can be enhanced and grow in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's really going to be the key to survival. Museums are already struggling with how to use technology in the galleries and engage people digitally. And now during their closure, they've been able to reach audiences virtually who've never even been to the museum. So I think it's definitely going to enrich their experience when they go back. But museums have also faced another critical issue with regard to audiences during this time, because in addition to the global health crisis, the political climate in our country, particularly the movement around racial inequality in this response to the death of George Floyd, has forced many institutions to question their identity and the narratives that they put on. And in your course at UT Southwestern, sympathy, empathy, and compassion are critical pillars that guide your curriculum. And I think they directly translate to diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are now buzzwords that dominate the conversation around cultural institutions. I'd like to know what steps you think museums need to take to make themselves more inclusive and more accountable.
Well, it's a big topic, and I wish we all had magic wands to kind of demonstrate what is going on in institutions, and diversity issues in museums from the staff and the board level all the way to the acquisitions of works of art to what programs they put on, whether they're exhibition or otherwise. What has happened is that museums have a lot of territory to cover, because I think a lot of people look at museums and in most cases, not in all, but in most cases, they have limited resources. They have a situation where budgets are governed by a lot of what we call restrictive funds, and the funds can only have been designated by donors to be used in particular ways. And the average person has virtually no idea that that's going on. There's a desire for all museums to be more inclusive, not only in terms of their staffing and board, and they work hard to do that. But, museums don't pay a lot of money in most cases. And so for young, talented people, minorities who are coming into the profession, it's hard to get jobs that, number one, because there aren't a lot, but number two, because the salaries, there'll be a smart person who's been received master's and PhD degrees will be quickly recruited by other institutions or other businesses to work in their areas. And museums are hard to break into, but not only that, they're difficult to be compensated. And I always remind people that it's the Mother Teresa. Do you have Mother Teresa tendencies? I'll ask them, are you willing to work tirelessly and forever for no money? You will get no recognition for the work that you do. And your work is in service of other people. And so your personal ambitions are harder to reconcile.
Now we're going to move to the fun part of the podcast. This is the lightning round. These are short, quick questions that I haven't given you, but no worries. They're going to be easy. This is the surprise.
All right.
The first one is early bird or night owl?
Night owl. Absolutely.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Talking or texting?
Talking.
Facebook or Instagram?
Instagram.
What's the last book you read?
Oh, my God.
Or what are you reading now?
What am I reading now? I'm reading 5 books right now. One is called Attending by Ronald Epstein, and he's a physician who uses meditation in his practice. Another one that I'm reading right now is Looking at Mindfulness by Christopher Andre, which is a study of 25 paintings that he's done with mindful activities. And then I'm reading The History of Pandemics, just, getting ready for my new class at the beginning of the year, and The History of Medicine. And because I have this brand new class, I forget who the authors are. They're beside in my bedroom. But I tend to read in areas that I love. I'm not a big novel reader at all. I like nonfiction, I guess is what I'm saying.
Same. Every now and again, I'll pick up a work of fiction, but it's not often. You kind of mentioned this in the beginning, but I'm wondering if there's one memory in particular, one of your first memories in a museum.
Oh, absolutely. I was with my mother, and we were at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. It was my family. We were moving to Florida, which was very scary. We were leaving New England and moving to Florida, and I had never been to the National Gallery. We stopped there in Washington for a few days to see the sites. And my father very happily took all of my brothers over to the History Museum. So I had 3 brothers, very boy-oriented, rambunctious brothers. And so my parents made this decision to divide us up. And my mother and I went through the National Gallery, and it was one of the clearest memories I have of this joyous experience. And they used to have little gallery. As you went into the galleries, there was a Xerox paper or mimeograph paper at that time that you could pick up that would tell you the name of every artwork in the gallery. And I just collected them all. And then my mom took me to the bookstore, and we bought as many postcards as we could. And then I created a book of the different galleries of the National Gallery of Art. And it was something I held on for many years. It just finally fell apart. And the painting there were 2 paintings during that trip that I fell in love with, and I've kept in my mind ever since then. One is Renoir's, the young girl with blonde hair with a watering can, and she's just standing there in the sunlight, in a perfectly beautiful blue velvet dress, looking at flowers and has a watering can. It's a very simple, home, domestic scene, but just reminded me so much of my life and what I wanted in life. And the other painting was by Raphael. It was the Tondo painting of the Madonna and Child and St. John the Baptist, and it is an entirely different in the Renaissance galleries. And for some reason, I thought and still think that is perhaps one of the most beautiful paintings in the world. And just the way it was conceived, and I didn't know it was the composition, but everything is so tightly arranged, and the colors and the sense of calm and beauty in that picture. So the National Gallery has always been near and dear to my heart. And 3 times I was offered positions there, but it was the wrong time in my career to take them. I would have loved to have done that because I have these very, very clear memories that led to my pursuit of art history.
Yeah, it's a really
and
fantastic.
My life in museums today. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's an incredible place. And I think, how many Leonardos in the United States are there? I think maybe less than 3, and they have one of them. It's an amazing place.
I think that's a great Google question, but I think it's maybe 2, 1 or 2. I don't think there are 3. There was talk of the Salvador Mundi, which is still disputed, but it is. I know there's one, a beautiful one at the National Gallery. Yeah,
I try to see it every time I'm there.
Yeah, every time. Of course.
My next question.
Well, I think that's our quest. Mm-hmm. You have the same quest in life that I do, which is to, how can we be wrong? Going to museums, you see beautiful things. You surround yourself with the history of the world and cultures and see things that bring you joy and happiness, and in and of themselves were created to do that. So that's why I love museums. That's why I feel so fortunate. This is the work I've done my entire life.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't live without art, and you're the same way. And my next question is, what do you collect?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I have always bought artworks from the communities that I've lived in. There are very strict rules of ethics that when you're in work in a museum, especially in a leadership role, like a director or deputy director, you can't conflict with the collections of the institution that you're supporting. So I wish there are many things I wish I could have purchased, but wasn't able to because of that. But in my own home, I have Motherwells again. From time when I was first working in New York, I was able to buy those. I wasn't in a museum, so they were my first purchases. And most recently, I bought a beautiful Nick Nicosia drawing of the minutes in the day. It's a series of 4 circles, each one a line that records the minutes in the day. And it is a fantastic piece because I use it when I meditate. So there are photographs of Hawaii and lots of, San Francisco Bridge and things, I have a Richard Misrach of the photograph of the Golden Gate Bridge. And that is a favorite of mine because I live there, and so each of the pieces that are in the collection come from a moment in my life.
I didn't think about that. The being in a leadership museum in a position would preclude you from collecting certain works of art from the community.
If you're a Japanese curator, you should not be collecting Japanese art.
Yeah, it's a conflict of interest. It can be, for sure.
Yeah.
My last question relates to ice cream. I know how much you love ice cream, and I've been fortunate enough to introduce you to new flavors of ice cream.
I know. That's how we met.
It is. So I'm wondering, this is hard. This is going to be very hard for you. So if you could only have one flavor for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Vanilla.
Okay, so you're a vanilla girl.
I'm a vanilla girl. I love great vanilla ice cream. Haagen-Dazs makes great vanilla ice cream, but it only can count once.
Right.
But given my choices, my second favorite is peppermint. So it's vanilla ice cream with real chunks of peppermint, which is you can get right now. But I'm a vanilla girl.
I feel that you could write a book about the flavors of ice cream, and every chapter would be a flavor of ice cream and include you do something in your practice and a recipe.
I've kept a record of all the ice creams I've tried, and so it could be a book. There are many that I didn't like. I would just go, yuck, what were they thinking? But, it's a lot of fun. I eat a lot less of it now, but it's a lot of fun to be in that space that you can enjoy. It's a great question.
When we first met, I was picking your brain, and I do this often with museum directors. It was something that I wanted to do, and still would love to do. But I'm wondering for those out there who are considering or want to be museum directors, what would be your advice to them?
Well, be brave. That's the first thing, that I would tell you need to be, because when I grew up and became a museum director, it was so different. The environment was so different, and the complexities of running an institution were substantially different than they are now. You need to have a background not only in art history, but also some understanding of business and human resources, because you're leading a group of people, both your board of trustees and your staff, to try to create a vision that you can move people in the institution and with the community to create and respond to. So having backgrounds in psychology or whatever you want to call it, the human aspects of leadership is really, really important. You have to have content. You have to know what you're curating and presenting. And so it's one of those wonderful jobs that requires both. You need to bring these together in a new way through the work that you're doing. And, this is where I say there's a lot, and you've done this in your own career, of benefit in taking these internships and fellowships where you make no money, but you gain real experience behind the scenes. And that's important. I have another young friend this year who's graduating from college who really wants long-term to be a museum director. And so because of COVID, rather than he can't get a job right now, what he's going to do is take some time and study business, because if you want to be a real museum director, you have to understand balance sheets, you have to understand investments, you have to be able to do projections and know how to read these things. And when I went to art history school, they didn't teach you any of that. I had to learn all of that on my own and through other classes.
Yeah, I feel it's even the same for artists, people who are in MFA programs. They don't teach them business. They don't teach them, legal advice either. It's definitely kind of a holistic. There are many paths to that position.
Yeah, there are. And I would say that the qualities that you want to look for in yourself or in people doing this are some of the ones that you've already mentioned. Their sense of their style of leadership. Is it inclusive or not? Is it, sort of authoritarian? In museums, you have to have an inclusive style. You have to have strategies about building resilience, because there can be great ideas fostered out there, but they're put down by your colleagues or by the lack of resources. You have to create and develop artistic vision, but artists, and many times people on your staff are artists that you're working with. So those are more exciting personalities, but their creative personalities also take more time to manage, because deadlines may or may not have the same significance. So it's a balancing act, and I think that you have to have those characters of courage and resilience and kind of a a way in which no matter what obstacles happen, you're like Gumby. You fall down, but you get right back up and you say, well, I learned something from that. Let's keep going, Pete. And, just sort of enjoy being in the moment and seeing those successes and acknowledging them.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you referenced Gumby. That brought me back to my childhood.
Yeah,
I love Gumby. I'm sure I still have the Gumby action figure somewhere, and we need to be more like Gumby. Yeah.
We all do. Fundraising is definitely, people would say to me, how can you keep going when people say no to me? And I say, because one of these days they're going to say yes. And, I just think of the little Gumby going splat and then he comes right back up and marching forward. And eventually you do find that person who says yes. And those are the moments of sheer joy in your life.
Absolutely. And I know hopefully there will be some medical professionals out here who hear this, and I'm sure there's many who are familiar with your work or the concept of the bridging art and healthcare. And I'd love to know what would be your advice to people who are working in the healthcare field who want to get more involved with the arts and try to integrate that into their practice.
All right. Well, of course, I believe it's truly an essential component of the work of physicians and medical staff as well as the patients. And the answer about how do I get involved in it is, just the burnout in the medical professions is one of the highest of all professions. People come in and they just fizzle out. And I'm deeply worried about what the impact of COVID is going to be on the future of practitioners. A lot of these nurses, doctors, and technicians and healthcare workers that are behind the scene are going to leave the COVID situation. They're in high overdrive right now, but when they get a moment to sort of reflect on this, I think there's going to be a huge exodus of people from the profession. So what the arts can do is really help them with balancing their work-life situation and getting them involved in other things that are beautiful and creative and life-supporting, so that they're not always in a complicated, difficult situation. So for me, what I would say is find, you don't have to create works of art. Just go look at beautiful things. Go out and walk in nature. Take time to be with yourself and be creative with yourself, and enjoy those moments of reflection and compassion to yourself. Those will make you stronger. And so I'd say just do what you can to enjoy it, enjoy life.
I couldn't agree more. And I hadn't thought about the mass exodus in medicine that will probably occur.
Yeah, I think we're on the brink of it. Yeah. Unfortunately, people are dying treating the COVID patients, but I think behind that are going to be the burnout, which is going to be huge.
Yeah. If you could own any work of art, what would it be? Just one. Like you could steal it and no one would ever know you had it. You'd get away with it.
Well, if I could steal one, I think actually it would be the Raphael Tondo Madonna at the National Gallery. And another one would probably be a Giotto, just one of his beautiful drawings that he did. But that is such a bad question to ask a museum director.
I know, it's fun. I love hearing people's responses. And I actually had a guest in season one who her response was Giotto, and she said she would steal the entire Cappella Scrovegni in Padua.
That's go for her. Good for her.
Right.
Yeah.
So I said, if it ever goes missing, I know where to find it. Right.
You know where to go. Yeah, that's pretty interesting. So it's happy news for all of us that we can imagine these things, but they belong in the public domain and to be well cared for. So let's hope for that most of all.
Absolutely. Well, you'd leave a nice replica, right, of the Giotto that you stole. Yeah, it's tiny. It's easy enough for you to hang.
Well, both of them they're not huge pieces, but they're sublime pieces to me.
So my final question I ask everyone is that there's no crystal ball, but if I gave you a magic wand, what would be your wish for the art world?
continued prosperity and creativity, or I'd probably reverse it. May the creative artists continue with their lives and produce the works, and may the artists and the institutions that care for them have a life of prosperity, so that they can effectively do their jobs. And may people join them in celebrating those moments. May there be people who really do participate in that in the best sense of the word. So it's more than one wish. I know that I was bad, but
no, but it's the action, it's the sentiment. We definitely we're all hoping for that. First of all, survival, but then after we're through that, prosperity, to continue to grow and flourish and create and to have new opportunities to create for people who haven't been creators before. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie. It's been such a privilege to speak with you.
Yeah, well, you've asked great questions, and I'm really, really grateful to you for this opportunity. We've covered a huge range of things in my life, and I know I've done my best to sort of help you understand them, but that you and your listeners to get an insight into my life. But so this is good.
Thank you. We just scratched the surface, but I can't wait to try new flavors of ice cream with you.
Okay.
I'm excited.
Well, when this is over.
Absolutely. Thanks again for listening to this episode of Artroverted. Stay tuned for next week, where we talk to collector and neuroscientist Shirley Muller about the science of collecting. Remember, when it comes to art, it doesn't matter if you're introverted or extroverted, because you can always be artroverted. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.